Okay, hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me on the Gift of Need podcast. I'm Jude Trang, author and observer of human need in society. This podcast explores the overlooked power of need and how it shapes behavior, relationships, and society. And it's born from the belief that our needs are not burdens, but gifts. My guest today is Rebecca Davis, and I'm so thrilled that she made the time, took it out of her busy schedule to be with us. Rebecca and her brother Pete are the directors and producers of the film Join or Die, a film about why you should join a club and why the fate of America depends on it. The film is based on Harvard professor Robert Putnam's work and book called Bowling Alone, The Collapse and Revival of American Community, released in 2000. Rebecca was a senior producer with NBC News for nearly a decade, where her work focused on social movements, environmental and economic justice, and community innovators. She has produced for HBO, Vice, Al Jazeera, and A&E, and was the supervising producer for season 2 of Vox's Netflix show, Explained. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, Rebecca?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that sums up a lot of the highlights. But as far as coming to this film, Join or Die, and featuring the work of Robert Putnam, my background as a news journalist, first doing local news for the New York Daily News and then working on national news at NBC, I think really led me to the place of wanting to tell this story through film of Bob's work. Because toward the end of my time at NBC News, I left there in 2019. I was really starting to feel the weight of covering a lot of the symptoms on the ground of this bowling alone phenomenon. So a lot of the stories I was doing, this was prior to COVID, which kind of brought on a whole other dynamic to the story. But I was covering, a lot of stories around America that I really think spoke to this pain of isolation and, declining participation in our community life as I was flying around the country, talking to Americans about what was going on in their towns and in their schools and in their community life. And so this film was a chance to kind of zoom out and not just keep telling a story of the symptoms on the ground, but talk about these larger trends and, hopefully point in the direction of where we can go from here to try to turn those trends around.
Interesting. Well, the film Join or Die fits perfectly with the gift of need because they both focus on our need for each other in the context of community. And in needing and connecting with others, we receive the gift of relationships in return. Rebecca, why did you and Pete name a film about community, Join or Die?
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to say, it is such a beautiful thing hearing about kind of the drive behind this podcast, in particular, because, everything you're saying there to this gift of need and our way to kind of reframe our needs as a gift. I think so beautifully aligns with the same exact message we're trying to, put out with the film. So I feel, kindred spirits in
Yes,
these
thank
parallel media efforts. Admittedly, we do have a little bit of a shocking, title, Join or Die, which we have gotten some pushback from folks on. People have said, why couldn't you just call it Join a Club? Um, which is ultimately, what we're trying to get people to do in the film is entice them to join a club and tell them why, the social science and health science behind why they should do that. But
Right.
we settled on this title, Join or Die, after, some back and forth, Pete and I, my brother, who co-produced it with me, because we do feel that the stakes are that high right now around our joining, for our physical health, for our mental health, and then outside of the individual level, for the health of our democracy. As we show in the film, Bob's research has really pointed to these kind of everyday community connections that we experience, in the bowling alley or on the pickleball court or in our religious communities or neighborhood associations. Those being strong, healthy organizations have very real impacts for our democracy functioning well. And where we're at right now with the decline of so many of those important civic and community institutions, as I think bears out in the headlines about the troubles in our democracy in this moment and kind of rising polarization and survey data from Americans reporting some of the lowest trust in our government of all time in our history. We not only for our individual health need to be joining things, but for this kind of larger democratic project as well. And so I think we liked that the title kind of spoke to those two aspects of our
Yeah.
joining.
As you were talking, I thought about it, how easy it is to demonize people when you're not associated with them. And I do
Yes.
it, oh, those people who believe this thing. But when you're in a group and you're up
Yes.
close and you have a relationship, you can start to see another person's point of view more objectively. And I think, again, that's the beauty of being in community with people, is that the judgmentalism tends to go down a few notches. And of course, this polarization politically in the country I think it should have been an expected result of Putnam's research that,
Yes.
yes, COVID took it another step, but this is beyond that. This is like kind of the peak of a society that's disintegrating around itself. And that's why I love when I came upon your film and your whole idea. I was thrilled. So,
Yeah.
what drew you and Pete to Putnam's work and inspired you to make the incredible effort it took to produce this film? I mean, you've described some of
Yeah.
it, but I think I
Yeah.
remember
Yeah.
that Pete had some personal connection.
Yes, yeah. So Pete, my younger brother, who I co-produced this film with, so we're a brother-sister filmmaking team. He was a student of Robert Putnam's as an undergrad, and he took Bob's, semi-famous class called Community in America. So a very ambitious, title to take on as an academic course. How do you in 6 months and maybe 12 classes wrap your arms around community in America to teach it. But that is the type of ambitious tasks that the academic Robert Putnam likes to take on. So Pete was a student of his. At that point, his famous nonfiction book Bowling Alone had been out for about 10 years. So that book came out in 2000. My brother Pete was a student of his in 2010. And in 2017, we were coming up on the 20-year anniversary of Bowling Alone. And we thought, no one, there's a lot of documentaries now. They're seeing a big boom. No one has done a documentary, at least an ambitious one. Bob had been featured obviously in many kind of news segments and, shorter profiles, but, a project that really took on and encompassed, his life's work. And we said, in 2017, we were also just seeing, year after year, these increasing, as you mentioned, incidents of polarization and, struggles that people were feeling on the ground in America about our community life. And we said, I think it's time to try to revisit this. What if we approach Bob together? I kind of do this filming work at NBC at the time where I was an employee. So I kind of had those skills. My brother had this personal connection with Bob. So we teamed up together. We approached him about the possibility of a documentary. We thought we would get that film out by 2020 for the 20th anniversary of Bowling Alone. We were delayed by about 3 years. And of course, as we all know, a global pandemic hit in the middle of that, which we could have never predicted, but was something that I think brought these conversations that much more to the forefront of so many people's lives as we lived through the natural experiment that it created for us of seeing what is it
Right,
like just to hang out with our neighbors and coworkers through a computer.
right.
And I think we're still figuring out as we come out of that, what we want this new world to look like. But so we were 3 years delayed, but ended up getting the film out in 2023. So it was 6 years of production, and we've now been touring that film full time for the last 2 years, to a lot of community screenings and um, just hoping that community groups and everyday Americans on the ground can use this film as a tool in work that they want to be doing,
Wow,
to turn
that's
around these.
great. Well, you know, in the book, Putnam explores three urgent civic questions. What makes democracy work? Why is American democracy in crisis? And most importantly, what can we do about it? So, how do you address those in this film?
Yeah. Yeah, so, Bob is probably most known by popular audiences in America for his work in the US in this famous book Bowling Alone, where he looked at, decline in bowling leagues but branched out of there to, like, so many civic associations in America, from unions to religious organizations to a lot of our older federated societies and participation in those, like the Masons and the Rotary and the Lions Club, women's associations. But Bob's career actually starts, about 20 years before, or 30 years even before Bowling Alone comes out in 2000, researching in Italy. So he was a political scientist asking this question in Italy, after they had decentralized power from their government, from centralized power in Rome, and gone through this, massive change to their political system where they spread power out to all the regions of Italy. And he gets in on the ground floor of that, political experiment and decides to ask, what makes democracy work? And he studies these regions of Italy as they're kind of getting their local governments off the ground. And he comes across this really incredible finding that ends up shaping, the whole of his career, which is, as he's kind of spending, 10, 20 years following these new regional governments in Italy. And he's at first thinking, maybe it's going to be the economics that makes them work. Maybe it's going to be the educational level. And what he finds, that ends up being a surprise, is it ends up being these softer things that made their democracies stronger, across these different regions. Things like having strong football clubs and strong choral societies in Italy, strong bocce leagues. Those were what made their democracies function, and function better than other regions where those things were not thriving. And he starts using this term social capital, to talk about that phenomenon. So social capital is like the bonds of trust and reciprocity that we build up between our neighbors and in our communities. And through that research, he unearths this really important mechanism. So then it's later when he turns his sights back to America, after this long Italian study, and sees that our civic associations are declining. He really, becomes one of the first academics to raise this early warning call. Now, every other day we're seeing headlines around these declines in neighboring and community life. But Bob really was one of the first to kind of get that into the mainstream conversation in the late 1990s. And so through the film, we kind of chart that early research into social capital, first with this famous Italian study, later as Bob turns his sights to America, and kind of applies that lens, and is continuing to sound that warning today, to try to implore Americans back into spending time as much as they are at the ballot box voting, which is a very important part of our democracy, but really working on that other piece of the puzzle, which is as important, as casting our vote. And that's kind of the everyday participation, in our local civic life and fabric. Life and fabric.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about Italy. My family's in Italy. John's family's from Norway, so we were just there. We usually go every couple of years. And I particularly noticed in Norway, it's interesting, we had this discussion, and I have it in the book. even though Norwegian society are not like we asked one of the cousins, tell us about like is would you say Norwegians are Christian or do they just have these churches, everything they still do that like the baptisms and confirmations and all this, but as far as I know, most of our cousins are agnostic. He said, he was so funny. Do you mean a personal? No, no, Norwegians don't have that. So but they have these social institutions that are still functioning that are definitely the cement to their society and their structure. So,
Yes.
and Italy is again the same thing. My cousins in like your generation are, they don't have any kind of faith. They have a moral belief in God and stuff, but everything is still centered around those things. And I was also surprised, like when we're on this island where my family's from, Ischia. I was coming out of a shop on Sunday with John, and we hear this band coming, and they're big into parades and marching bands, and you expect it to be all these old people. It is not. It's people from their teens up until their 70s marching in this band. They just do it as part of their community thing. It's
Yes.
just
Yes.
like, it's hard to picture that happening here in America,
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's
Yes.
very multi-generational. So,
Yes.
you
Yeah,
know,
we
um,
still have a big parade in our hometown where Pete and I grew up in Falls Church, Virginia, that I think
really,
really, shaped us. Our town was very civic. And, as you mentioned, this parade, that was the place every year on Memorial Day where, all the different clubs and organizations would come out to march in the parades. You would have the
right.
Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts and the bus patrols and the climate
Yeah,
action group trying to get people to start recycling in the
right.
1990s.
Yeah,
And, and parades are part of this civic fabric because it is our
yeah.
community associations on display. And
It's so true.
yeah, so we
Putnam
got to bring back those
explains.
parades.
Yeah, exactly. My Italian father was, I mean, every year he'd go to the rodeo parade here in Tucson. We have every film, every old Super 8 film has got the rodeo parade an hour long, and us kids, we hated it. So anyway, because we weren't involved in any of the groups.
Right, right, right. When we need those groups back so that people can march in the parade still. Otherwise,
Exactly.
we're going to be in the parade if we don't have the clubs. All a
Putnam
cycle.
explains that groups, clubs, unions, religious organizations are where we form those social bonds. And he says they are the training ground and the glue for democracy. You've kind of elaborated on that already. Anything else to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've been thinking a lot as I left kind of working in the mainstream media, I worked at NBC News, and the election every 4 years was certainly their, Super
Mm,
Bowl of events. And, they spent basically the entire year hyping up, for election day and the coverage. And as I mentioned before, voting is important in our democracy. But, as you mentioned in that quote from Bob, there's a lot of other ways we can participate in being participants in a democratic society. And I think a lot of those, have been going by the wayside as we've fallen out of community. And so I think our hope for the film is to get Americans to ask, what party are you a member of? If you're a member of the Democratic or Republican Party or, another third party in the US, are you not just going to vote, but are you going to weekly meetings for that party? What does it
right,
mean to participate in that party? Voting is just one expression of that. And then beyond that, starting to ask ourselves, what are all the other spaces where we can practice democratic practices, outside of the explicitly political system.
right.
So having a union in your workplace, that is democracy in your workplace. It's getting your coworkers together and say, we're going to collectively work on something. We're going to write it together, our contract. We're going to vote on it. We're going to elect officers and stewards of the union. That is bringing democracy in your workplace. If you're in a food co-op. I think a lot of people in America are shopping at commercial grocery stores, but there's, a good number of food cooperatives where the people in the town decide what food is ordered to that grocery store and then collectively work at running it and also have officers and have elections.
Mm,
Almost every
interesting.
sector of our life that we look at, we can bring democracy into that space, and our
Right.
democracy would be more vibrant, if we did, and less of a spectator sport that I think is
Right.
income
Right.
as we
Exactly.
watch democracy play out on TV.
Putnam said this quote, faith communities in which people worship together are arguably the single most important repository of social capital in America. Why and in what ways are faith communities so vital to the health of America?
The leading way that Americans participate, if they are a member of something in the US, is a religious organization. So,
Mm,
according to Bob, it makes up almost half of our social capital in the US is
wow.
coming from religious participation. And traditionally, Americans have been big participators and members of religious groups kind of, across the various different sectors of religion, not just of the Christian faith, but Jewish, Muslim, various other faith practices. Around the high point of social capital in the US, like the middle of the last century, we were up at almost 80% religious organization membership. So people that said, I'm a member of a religious community. Um, by the time, we were working on our film, around 2017, 2018, that number dropped for the first time in American history below 50%. So now less than 50% of Americans, say that they are a member of a religious congregation. And then interestingly, though, um, there's also survey data around faith in, belief in higher power. And a
Mhm.
very large majority of Americans still do say that they believe in, God or some higher power. So they are still believing. They're not leaving for lack of belief. But they are choosing now to not, express that belief in a community setting. And so that's really, I think, where the interesting aspect lies when we kind of look at those two pieces of
Hmm.
data
Hmm.
together.
And that's
It's
another
that they
whole subject. That is why faith communities are failing to engage with people. That we could do another conversation on that. So
yeah. I
I
think this is the
understand.
struggle of all of
Uh,
our organizations. So, our faith communities are not alone in that.
yeah,
Every institution, and we're up against a lot, as far as the technology, I think that's competing for people's
right,
attention
right.
right now, and other forces kind of keeping folks at home. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I understand Putnam's a master at translating his trails blazing social science research into engaging stories. How did you incorporate that into the film?
Yeah, so as a producer, when you're looking for a story that's going to be visual and be good on screen, academics, I will say, are not always at the top, of our list.
Exactly.
But Bob had that, star power, I guess I'll say, where he was not the teacher where you're kind of yawning in the back of the classroom and they're kind of droning on and you're having a hard time following them. We got to sit in and film several of his classes in his last semester of teaching. And, his way of teaching, his way of talking about these issues, just had all the students, in his class in that last semester of teaching, alive with their minds on fire as they were kind of thinking and grappling, with these issues. And I think what we wanted to do with the film is say, how do we let everyone take Bob's class? And really be able to transmit, which we didn't have to do much except hit record and let Bob speak. But and for those who've seen the film who might be listening, I think that's probably apparent to most people that he really, his passion for this subject and his ability to translate these more complex academic ideas into real everyday language that we can understand, as we look at our own life, is really unique to him, as a
Mhm.
communicator. Yeah.
And well, just looking at some of your graphics, like your promo for the movie, I just love it. Obviously, he doesn't take himself too seriously. He has a good sense of self-humor also. So I just love it. I love all of that. And you've got a bunch of special guests on there and interviews and things like that, right? So that's a
Yeah. Yeah,
I
Bob's
saw
Bob's what I would call a good hang.
yeah.
Fun guy to hang out with. And, I was lucky
um
enough to get to follow him around for several years. And I can report that his on-camera personality and off-camera personality is exactly the
the
same. That
same,
level
the
of
same.
energy and enthusiasm,
Geez,
holds true
boy.
after the cameras.
Um, okay, says we're running a little bit short on time here. Join or Die was the official selection at the Tucson Film Festival. I was excited to see. It's also aired many other film festivals and also won lots of awards. Anything in particular that you're particularly proud of, Rebecca?
So Pete and I were up in New York about 2 weeks ago. Now we were nominated for 2 Emmys for the film, which was
Wow,
really exciting.
congratulations. Yeah.
And we did not win, unfortunately, but we were honored just to be kind of, nominated, and particularly in the two categories we were recognized for. One was Best Animation, so we got to go there and also celebrate with our incredible animator Mark Lopez that kind of brought all of the data and those graphs to life. In addition to, animating a lot of the cool archival material that we were able to unearth for the film. And then the other was for best writing for our script. And Pete and I were really proud of that because Pete narrates the film, but together we wrote the script for the film and really poured over every single and this or but
Wow.
tiny, and as you can imagine, two siblings, we fought our way through for every word of that script. So that felt like a special one for Pete and I because we were
Yeah.
uh, had really put a lot into the writing of this one.
Well, I'm just so excited. I think I have yet to see it. We've been back and forth. Our daughter lives in Australia, so we spend half of the year there, and I keep anyway, it's just I really can't wait to see it. To end, what do you and Pete hope to see happen from Americans watching Join or Die?
Yeah, so we have one call to action in the film, which we state in the very first line of our script. This is a film about why you should join a club and why the fate of America depends on it. And we hope we prove that out in the film. We hope everyone who sees this film, if you are a member of a club, we hope this film is a little wind at your back to keep getting out to those meetings, even when you're feeling tired and want to stay home on your couch and just watch TV. We hope this is a little extra nudge. And for the almost, unfortunately, 50% nearly. So the last data we have, around 43% of Americans, so almost half, are members of zero clubs right now. We hope that this film will be a little nudge to, if there's something you've been thinking about joining, thinking about starting, that you leave the theater or, you turn off the film on Netflix and, decide to Google some clubs to join, or send out a post to get some neighbors together and kick
Exactly.
something off.
There's
Yeah.
so many options when you think about it. I mean, it's just amazing. So, um, well, thank you for the labor of love that you and Pete have poured into Join or Die. What can people listening do to help further this effort to build back America's civic, involvement in health?
Yeah, so like I said, I mean, and this is the really cool thing about Bob's data. You don't have to go start a brand new nonprofit or do something super Herculean to help our democracy by getting out and joining one organization, in your local area. Um, you know, According to Bob's research, if you believe the message that we're sharing in the film and take a look at the data that we try to help use to prove that out, those small acts can have very big impacts. So we really just encourage
How
people
can
to
people
get
help
involved.
promote the film? That's the other thing, right? Because that's gonna, I know I looked at trying to do that and then we left for Australia and we're getting ready to leave
Yes.
again, but it takes kind of, I mean, you're gonna picture people coming together to
Yes.
get this going and to get it shown in different cities. Just explain that real briefly before we end.
Totally. So we're on a big community tour with the film, touring, all over the US and internationally. As of this week, we've done about 460
Oh
community
my
screenings.
gosh.
But we want every American, and beyond to see this film. So, we're going to have to host a lot more screenings to get there. So if you are interested in hosting a community screening of Join or Die, you can head to our website, joinordiefilm.com, and we have a host a screening button right there on the website where you can get more info about how to bring this film to your religious community, your neighborhood association, your sports club, any group that you might be a member of. We would love to connect with you, help facilitate a community screening. And if you want to check out the film first to see if it's right for your community, it is going to be on the Netflix platform for home viewing, and you can check it out there for the next 10 months or so. It'll still be up there.
Wow, that's great. Oh, well, thank you, Rebecca, for making the time to be with us today and talk about how the needs we have can become opportunities for others to use their gifts to meet the needs, just like you and your brother. There was a need, you had the talent, you're working to help fill and support this need for people, which I think in turn creates connections for us as individuals, communities, and then ultimately society. And my conviction is that when we do things like this, we become the recipients of great joy and fulfillment, and everyone has a need to feel like they have a purpose while they have their life and breath on this earth. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yes, and thank you, Jude, for the beautiful message of your podcast. We're really honored to be on.
Well, thank you. So, folks, head on over to joinordiefilm.com to get all the info on how you can be involved in bringing this important film to your group or community, and to find one of the many screenings across the country and where it might be being shown near you. The great music you're hearing was written and performed by Gabe Kubanda at Kubanda Music. You can find him on any streaming service. Please consider following and rating my podcast on Apple or Spotify, and subscribing to my free Substack newsletter, and leave a comment or review. I'd love to hear from you. Bye.